Jim Hannick here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zender. This week on The Open Door, we speak with Maria Maric, another friend in Sweden. She is an educator, an activist, and a leading member of the Swedish Democratic Party. Maric is also familiar with the American Solidarity Party. In fact, she has digitally introduced Amar, Patel, and Mario Ramos to Swedish audiences. As always, we begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may always be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Mario, I wonder if you could get us started.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, Maria. So our encounter today is about the Christian Democratic Party. So I think the first question that I want to, or our audience may want to know is, how did you come to join the Christian Democratic Party?
Well, I'm in my 40s right now. And one question could be like, why didn't I join the party earlier? I've always been interested in politics. Like I was the head of the student council in middle school, and going through university, I developed there a democratic system of election to let all the faculties, whatever. I'm sorry, English is not my first language at all. But I helped them to have representatives through a new democratic system. That I've always been interested in democracy, in politics. I studied political science. I looked at how civic mentality grows in communist countries going through transition to democracy. So this was my basis. But I thought that sometime I would also do research. And I thought that maybe being in a party would then render me biased, and they would think that because I was a representative of a certain party, my research would be compromised. But then came the children along, and we live in this small township, 1,100 people, and there was a shift, because I know people know about Sweden. We have one of the best parental leaves in the world. We're allowed 450 days of work for each child, and we're allowed to keep our job, and we're paid during that time. But some of the political parties, and they talked about this some 10 years ago, want to divide this pay and these days so that sometime is only for the mother and sometimes is only for the father. And it is already that 90 days is for the father, 90 days is for the mother. And I really feel that the state needs to back off the family. The family has to have the right to make their own choices. If the father wants to stay home the whole time, that's fine. If the mother wants to be home, it's fine. It's their decision what they do with this money and with these days, and the state shouldn't meddle in this. They all have all these kind of ideas that it's better for equality and it's better for the pension for women, and the women need to get out and be a part of the workforce as soon as possible for helping state finances and all these things. But I really think that, okay, they say this, but they have to back off the family. The family have to make their own decisions. So when they started talking about dividing this in two, and I already had 4 kids, I thought, no, I have to be a part of that one party that truly advocates the family's right to make their own decisions, to have sovereignty. So I became a member, and soon afterwards started started doing other things within the party.
So it seems that you were taking distance from the paternalism of the state, or
Yes.
what we may call estatism. So you were given priority to the family, priority to the community, or we may say priority to intermediate institutions.
Yeah.
So that is very interesting. So we may get into the ideology, if that is a good term, of the Christian Democratic Party. So Jim, do you have anything to follow up that answer?
Well, I wonder what it is to be an ombudsman.
Yeah.
At the university where I held forth, casting artificial pearl before real swine, there was an ombudsman, and I could never figure out what the ombudsman did, but I'm sure that an ombudsman could do a lot. So what is it?
Well, we've exported 2 words from Swedish to the English language, and one is smorgasbord, and the other one being ombudsman. Of course, everyone knows all the names of the things in IKEA as well, and then you put them together to whatever you want them to be, hoping that the instructions are right. The instructions for my work is not that fixed. I do what needs to be done. In the area where I work, there are 3,700 members, and we are 3 ombudsmen employed. All the other people working with politics, or involved in politics, I should say, usually do this at their spare time, at their own expense. They might get a little pay for the meetings they attend, but there's a lot of voluntary work. So when they have something that needs to be done, that has to be done at work time, I do that. I carry tents, I set them up at rallies, I order things, and I get the information from the right person to the next person. And all this is making up more than 40 hours a week, which is our standard working week. I fix problems. I solve conflicts.
If it weren't for you, nothing would actually get done.
Well, if it weren't for the ombudsman, no, very little would be done, because you need this sort of glue in between all the goodwill and all the people doing things at their own time. And there has to be a few people employed. So, yeah.
Very good. Very helpful.
Christopher?
I think we do a number of shows, and we talk a lot about Christian democracy on this show. I think probably new people listening, even a lot of people might not understand what it is. And one gets the impression that it means something maybe somewhat different from country to country.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Christian democracy is? What are the ideas? What are the fundamental ideas that propel it forward? What is it that makes it distinct, say, from whatever major parties you might have in Sweden?
Oh, this is actually one of my dreams. Something I would love to do further on is looking just at the different countries, how they present, where there is a Christian Democratic Party, how they present the ideology or social philosophy. I hope we'll get into that distinction as well soon. But it is a basic set of values, I would say, which holds the human dignity at center, always in the vision. You always have to have human dignity at first, at heart, and then you have the fallibility of man. You do not seek an ideal system, because you know men are good and bad. You have the idea of stewardship, both looking back in time, taking advice from earlier generations, and also looking ahead, knowing that the decisions you make today do make a consequence for people in generations to come. You also have, I paint pictures when I talk about this. For me, stewardship is a tree growing. You have the roots. You have to know the ideas before. You have this tree, in the tree that grows money, because there's no money growing on a tree. And that is also stewardship. doing well with the money, the tax money that you have to spend. You cannot have crazy ideas and build whatever. It's the people's money. It has to go back to the people. And then you have the basics of solidarity and subsidiarity, which are twin values. You have the solidarity for people regardless, because of the human dignity, and you cannot, even though you cannot do everything for everyone because you have this set of subsidiarity, you have to leave to people to make their own decisions. As I talked about, the family for one, and it could be companies or whatever. You have to make them have their own sovereignty in their own sphere. But and then they have the other levels. You can only put, I mean, societies grows on the people, not on a certain system, and the state should not take over this. I think that this set of ideas is what is Christian democracy. You can find it in other parties as well, but it's this complex of ideas that makes up Christian democracy.
If I ask one more time, what makes it Christian?
What it makes it Christian?
Yeah.
Well, it's the tradition that has been passed down to us through the church and through, of course, the Catholic social teaching. I mean, the ideas of what is a person, what makes up a person, has been talked about first, perhaps by Aristotle, but then by Thomas Aquinas, and then passed down through this tradition. And also what we have learned, for when I talk about the ideal of solidarity, I always talk from the Good Samaritan, because that shows us what real solidarity is. And these are teachings that you can find in the Bible, and it has been passed down to us through the church. So that makes it Christian.
So it's very interesting. I'm wonder, what is the reception of this message? I understand that you are teaching about Christian democracy. So what is the reception to this message from the young people? When you talk about, you said very, very clearly the anti-utopian view that we are working toward a more decent world, but we are not promising any ideal state or ideal society. And so in addition to that, we allow people to take responsibility in their own communities. What is the reception of the young people of that message?
In Sweden, at least, the Christian Democratic Youth Party is the second largest, I think, today. That is in Sweden. We have the Social Democratic Party, which is larger, and then there's also a Swedish Democratic Party, which is holds nationalistic views higher, and they're quite big, but it appeals to young people. Young people seem to want to form families, seem to want to be able to make their own decisions in a way that, and they want there to be some sort of morale in society. We had the 60s with their times of no morals, there should be no Christian teaching, but there can never be no morals. It's always filled with other kinds of morals. And I think this appeals to young people.
So there is, I think there is an issue with religion itself. Mm-hmm. That remind me something very interesting. After the Second World War, the proposal of a secular state, even though that secular state did not mean empty from the Christian tradition, was proposed in Europe by Christian Democrats, Adenauer and many others. But today, secular state may mean differently, at least in most of the world, which is secularism. It's just empty from the Christian tradition.
Mhm.
So you want to follow up that, Jim?
Well, let me backtrack a little bit because so often here in the United States, what we need is, well, I call it nuts and bolts and specific ways of doing things. And I understand that you teach a course, the ABC of
Mhm.
Christian democracy. And that looks like it might be something that we could use and we could benefit from. I wonder if you could tell us how that works and what gave you the idea for it.
Yeah, of course. I will also backtrack just a little bit because I really want to say that Sweden is one of the most secular countries in the world. We're extreme on the World Values Survey. We're like right up in one corner. Most people would say they believe not in any God, and we do not, in our party, we do not demand anyone to have a personal faith or confession, but you have to adhere to the values and the ideals. Um, so we do also separate this in the party. But you talked about this ABC course. And I would say the ABC course has been something we have done for a long time in the Christian Democratic Party of Sweden. What I have done is taking it online. I have had in November 88 new members joining me for once a week for 3 weeks. And we have talked about the ideology. We have learned about the political structure of the party, its sisters organizations, and also the last time we talked about how you can get involved in making politics yourself. What way do you have to get your proposals to the principals or to the party top, so to say? Like, how do you do this? And it was exciting for me to see all these people, because going online with 88 people, I had 50 different from 50 different places in Sweden. So they really got to connect, and I do advise you to do the same. Many of them had not even been to their local party group, but still they came online. So this was exciting. What I have done that is entirely new, or it actually has its birthday today on December the 2nd, is that I started an online Facebook group where I wanted us to have the chance to talk about Christian democracy as an ideology separate from political decision making or whatever is talked on the table today. So I started this group, and anyone is allowed to join, but you have to answer if you are a member of the party or if you're only interested in the ideology. And today it has 1,221 persons that has joined, and many of them are only interested in the ideology and are not members of the party. I also started interviewing persons like you are doing right now with me, because dialogue is a way to learn. I thought, how am I going to be able to fill this with content? I have to speak with other people that know a lot. And I thought first, I will learn something and then I will tell other people. Instead, I started filming these interviews and putting them out because it's a good way to learn. So,
Very interesting.
yeah. I can help you translate the program to English, and then you can have a look and fit it to your system.
Yes. So, Christopher?
Yes, you talk about Sweden being a secular country.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find it's difficult, given the better of a term, the values you espouse, the ideas you espouse, to actually attract people in Sweden, particularly young people?
Well, it is. I mean, every other year we have this big meeting where we decide on which path we're going to take based on the values. And there's always someone asking, should we really be called the Christian Democratic Party? This word Christian will make people not wanting to be a part of us. We had a large migration of Muslims, and some of them are very family orientated, family centered, and they would be able to hold the same values politically as we do, but they're afraid to perhaps vote for a Christian Democratic Party or be a part of a Christian Democratic Party. So there's always this discussion. In Sweden, to have a faith is not viewed as something that gives you a moral basis. It's more like you're superstitious, and that's not it's not seen as a good thing. But especially the youth, and I would say especially in our youth party, they do advocate us to have this Christian Democratic Party and to know where our roots comes from. They are also a little bit more conservative than the mother party, and perhaps that is more modern with the youth today, to be a bit conservative after everything has been quite radical for a while.
Is the family strong in Sweden? Is there like a high rate of divorce? Is that what maybe moves the?
Yes, it is a high rate of divorce, and there's also this quite strong idea that you need to have done everything before you settle down and have a family. And this leads to people waiting a long time to have their kids. Many people are in the 30s when the first kid comes. If you live in a bigger city, you might be 40, and then it's hard. But I think that the ideals of finding someone who actually appreciates you is quite strong, especially perhaps with kids that has grown up in divorced families.
Maria, when you talk about conservative,
Mm-hmm.
seems that people here in America may have in their mind one meaning, and perhaps it's different in Sweden. What do you mean by conservative, more conservative?
Oh, the thing is, we had such debates internally in the party, and I think they really lead to nothing. What I mean with conservative, the way I view it as a positive thing, is when I see it in these aspects of stewardship, where you do honor like tradition, and you honor the decisions that they made before, and you both look behind you and you look ahead in your political decision making. It's not what's good for only the next political term. It's what's good for the common good, what's good going forward. And I really feel that there are some strong aspects of this in conservatism that we needn't argue about whether to call it conservative or not, because it's just a word that has to be filled with meaning. And you say perhaps there might be some negative thoughts about it, and I don't know, perhaps some people do use it just because it's thought provocative. But I would say within the party we need to just lay it down and be all right with that. What we mean is taking what's good from before and doing it better, preserving what's good, and then moving ahead.
That's very good. Jim, you have anything to follow up?
Yes, and I might start to ramble a bit, so don't hesitate to stop me. Maria, when you speak about conservatism, one writer that comes to my mind is Edmund Burke, the British parliamentarian, very thoughtful, roughly around the time of the French Revolution, a little bit more after it. And when he talked about not conservatism, but tradition, he described it as a contract, a covenant that included those who have died, those who are present, and those who are to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that notion of tradition is extraordinarily powerful. And I think also of the British writer G.K. Chesterton, who talked about tradition as the democracy of the dead, that they too play a role. Now, I have no quarrel with the term tradition, but it seems to me, and I heard you say that talk about conservatism comes to nothing, something like that. I agree with that. And one of my dreams is to eliminate the terms right and left, conservative, liberal, and progressive. Another writer that comes to mind when you talk about these terms is a fellow named H.L. Mencken, and he always referred to conservatives as those who wish to protect existing evils, and liberals as those who wish to introduce new ones.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
So-
I love the concept of tradition that you brought out.
Yeah,
In
yes.
the way that-
Now, also, when you speak of Christian in the context of a secular society, although this is a little footnote, within the last year, an important American journal, First Things, ran an article called Sweden, Not So Secular.
Mhm.
Interesting. Now, when you talk about Christianity and you speak of it in terms of stories, the Good Samaritan, I can see that stories are a way to introduce Christian values, and I would want to say Christian truths, but then stories are stories. And at some point, people want to say, yes, that's a great story, but is it true?
Yeah.
And a while back, you'd spoken about people seeing Christianity as superstitious. There's an American writer named Ed Feser, who is, well, here's a French phrase. I can't pronounce it properly. An enfant terrible, a young buccaneer of Thomistic thought. And one of Ed Feser's first books was called The Last Superstition, and it was about atheism.
Mhm.
So here in the United States, for whatever reason, we have a good many Christian thinkers who are, for want of a better term, aggressive. They're not about to apologize on any point, whether it's science or politics or philosophy. And it seems to me that a worry that the Christian Democratic Party would have anywhere, and I would think that this would be a worry in Germany as well, would be taking a position on Christianity that's oh so very nice.
Yeah.
And in fact, don't let me ramble much farther, Mario.
So what,
No,
what,
but it is.
Richard.
Christianity is radical. It is
All right.
radical in the social teaching, as it is. It is.
Bertrand Russell, who was a notorious critic of Christianity, said that one of his reasons for opposing it was that it was a tigerish religion.
Yeah.
so
And if it turns out to be flowers kept away in a little book somewhere and looked at occasionally, there's a real problem. And I don't know if you want to speak to any or all of those issues, or I don't know why Mario didn't even interrupt me.
I tried several times, and now
Oh,
I don't know.
let me rephrase, if I can, what you're saying. So perhaps the point is that how then we go about and give more accurate description of Christian Democratic Party, or let's call it ideology, even though ideology itself has a lot of connotations which may not be accurate in describing the Christian Democratic Party. But nevertheless, how would you describe the ideology in general terms of the Christian Democratic Party? Or is fair to call ideology to the belief or the conviction of the Democratic Party?
Wow. Yeah. But I would say that to represent, I did answer one of Christopher's questions a little bit about what I believe the core values of Christian democracy to be and how they're interacted with each other. But I really think, like in all cases, it's a lot about prejudice. And I have had 1 year now really studying what is Christian democracy and what do we believe in these different areas, and how is it, what is stewardship. And I've taken like weeks looking at that, and I've taken weeks looking at solidarity and so on. But when I do this, for example, when I looked at solidarity, it says in the books we have before in Sweden, it says, we believe solidarity to be this, but the social democrats say that it is this other thing. It's like a group solidarity, and it strives that we should have a fight between the classes and this and that. I believe this also to be prejudice towards social democrats. I think there's prejudice towards other parties because we do not have dialogue, and we do not seek dialogue with each other, like true dialogue, listening, asking questions, being interested in understanding the other side. We do view each other as enemies instead of political opponents. We do not take time to give good criticism to good proposals, and also saying sometimes, I think it's good you're looking at this and this and this, but the way your solution is wrong. And now I'm rambling a bit, but these are like...
It's fun, isn't it? It's fun.
If I can jump in there, there is a reflection, I think, made by some Latin American Christian Democrat as to whether or not the Christian democracy is an ideology, and most of them say no. And the reason why they say no is because when you have an ideology, the system is closed. You have all the answers, all the prescription. You have a handbook of public policies that you need to implement. But Christian democracy in that sense, because we don't have this ideal state to which we are moving toward, we don't have this utopian state, and we have the stewardship, our system is open-ended. In that sense, it's not an ideology in the proper sense. And sometimes they use two terms in order to describe that: ideology and ideologism. In other words, the exaggeration of this model. Christian democracy in that sense is open-ended. In other words, the stewardship, solidarity, subsidiarity, all these principles led the protagonism of the people to build their own society, given the fact that that society will never be perfect because we are limited and sinful human beings. So I don't know if that helped in describing this.
This is of course a debate, but this is a debate that's close to the one if we should call ourselves conservatives. You have to fill it with some content, and you did now fill it with the content of how you can use the word ideology, and I do understand that. And I also understand the people saying that it's like a social philosophy. It describes how people are and why society has to be in a certain way because people are this way. And this aspect of an ideology being something that you put upon people, it's not based from below and up. But I'm comfortable with using the word ideology in, like, say, this group that I created on Facebook, Because what I want to see is how can you connect this worldview, so to say, to political decisions, and other political parties or streams have an ideology. So for most, it's not a problem. I want to use words that people can understand easily, and then you can have a philosophical debate about it. Yes, but most people that join this, or most people that are interested in politics, they do not concern themselves that much with, is Christian democracy an ideology or isn't it? Once I created a group and people started joining, okay, I thought perhaps I shouldn't have used that word, but they keep joining. So
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Christopher, anything?
Yeah, I don't have a problem so much with the term ideology either. It's, I mean, if you mean by it a set of ideas, and I think that's what probably should distinguish, maybe in many cases, political parties. I can imagine you could have a social order where you would have a number of political parties who have basically the same convictions about the nature of society. That would be a very healthy society as long as those ideas are correct. But I would tend to look at what would distinguish, at least should distinguish in our context, the United States, a Christian Democratic Party would be one which recognizes that the nature of government, what the nature of the government, nature of human community, human society is, namely that we join together for something called the common good. And this common good is, we need to be directed towards that common good on a certain level, and that's the role of government. So in the United States, you have this sense of, which is endemic to, I think, the American experience of government and American ideas, is that government is sort of a necessary evil, because what the highest good, of course, is individual liberty. As opposed to that, I would think the more traditionally Christian concept would be that no, government and societal life is not ordered towards the individual as such, but is ordered to the common good, in which the individual finds his fulfillment as in fullness of his personhood. So that the common good is not something alien to the individual, but it's something in which the individual actually achieves his own proper good. That would be, I think, what would distinguish. I was curious, like in Sweden, do you have a kind of what you might call libertarian orientation, political thought, where basically government and human society are looked upon almost as necessary evils, but necessary because the purpose is to give the individual as much freedom as possible. That's really the purpose of society, rather than the common law.
I would say we don't have a party that sort of have that platform. We have a party which is called the Liberal Party, but the Liberal Party often makes suggestions that is this way of pointing people into the direction that they think that they would be free. I mean, the party thinks that they would be free, but I see it as oppression. I understand, for one thing, that it's important for kids to be able to learn. That's a way for them to fulfill their own potential. And we have, for a few years ago, it was from the age of 7 that you had to be in school. And then they lowered it down to the age of 6. And now the liberals want it to be from the age of 5 or 4 because it's good for them, they say. And I think that's limiting the freedoms of the family and not opening up the liberty for the individual. So we don't really have those night watch sort of parties in Sweden. Not in the government or not in any other level of community. There are just a few people thinking like that. And I think also the social democratic thought has been really strong in Sweden, and it influences how other parties think as well, seeing the state as something good, and the state should fix things for you. What I see instead is that you take so many things away from the person, and they're not able to decide for themselves, that they feel lost. when they do not have guidance from the state.
Right. So what you lose then is a sense of subsidiarity, that there are intermediate bodies between the state at the top, as it were, and the individual at the bottom, right? And that, I mean, that we have the same kind of tendencies here in the United States among certain groups, whereas other groups want to have pretty much as much just individual freedom. So there's this weird kind of contrast between two extremes in a way.
But I think that in many areas the state needs to back off, but we need a strong state where people need help. As I talk about the family and the family having its own sphere where they can make their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do, because I talk in pictures a lot, I talk about this as a light bulb or a globe, which is glowing by itself. The family is glowing by itself. It's a sphere that should be able to make their own decisions. But if the light is fading, someone needs to step in. Now, this could be like a friend, a family friend, or the community that lives around. If you see that, okay, the parents are not doing the parenting well, someone else should step in. But it could also be another administrative level. If you cannot help, you should be able to report to someone who comes and helps parents to become better parents. So you should not just leave people behind. And also in Sweden, we have a quite developed healthcare system where we pay very little for healthcare, but we pay high taxes. And I think most Swedes are fine with that as long as the healthcare system works.
So perhaps another interview would be about the background of the Christian Democrat in terms of ideology. And the reason what I'm saying is that what Christopher is saying, that in some ways was indicated by Benedict XVI when he visited the United States, the distinction that he made between modernity and enlightenment. And so when the term ideology is more Enlightenment term, which come from the 1750s, to the Tracy, the French, which began outlining the future society. And he called ideologies to substitute Christianity. That idea was pervasive in Europe and in Latin America. In the United States, that version of the Enlightenment did not really reach to this shore until the last, I think, 40 years. And so was mainly an idea of modernity, which was a little bit different. So in other words, ideology was more Jacobin than the founding fathers established here in this shore. So in that sense, there is a disconnection, if you will. Today, perhaps, is more homogeneous. We are witnessing a Jacobin type of democracy as well. That's just a side comment, a sidebar. So, but Maria, going back to your answers, very interesting. Do you consider yourself a politician, an activist, a teacher? How do you describe yourself?
Well, in different areas of life, you are different things. Like I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a human being. I do my work as an ombudsman, which gives me the opportunity to fulfill some of my potential. I carry certain knowledges. I know several languages. I have this background of studying political science and such, but I wish to serve my community. And I do that by being a politician part-time. But once you step into the role of being a member of a party, you have eyes upon you all the time. I mean, I cannot post something on Facebook that would be too private because I'm a politician. And I'm fine with that. I have chosen to serve the community this way. I'm not saying I'm happy with the way politicians are being portrayed. Some people will just call them idiots straight out. But I know what I'm trying to do, and I know who I am, so I'm fine with calling myself a politician. And what I do want to do is to make sure that tax money works for the people and not for systems, and that we are actually striving towards a common good. So that's what I do. That's how I fill the word politician with meaning.
Thank you. Jim, you have our final question. We are getting closer to our time.
Don't forget, Mario, because of me and my technical ineptitude, we started 7 minutes late.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. You mentioned Facebook just a minute ago, and I'm a Johnny come lately to Facebook. And I've noticed that most people who use Facebook do use it for quite personal things, lots of pictures of their families and so forth. And I sometimes think that my Facebook friends suffer because almost all my posts are sharply political or sharply philosophical, speaking in general terms. That said, my last post was a piece from a publication called The Open Society. And I think that The Open Society is a George Soros publication, really. And what was it? It was an extended, sharply worded attack on the family. And of course, there's a long tradition of this going all the way back to Plato. In Plato, you have this idea, if you're ever going to have a just society, you have to get rid of the family. And that's oftentimes overlooked in discussions of Plato's wisdom.
Right, angels too.
Now, why am I saying these things? Because you appeal to, and we appeal to, core values. And I don't think you take very seriously the possibility that the family is a disvalue or a kind of malignity. You take very seriously the view that the family is the birthplace of society, as do I. Now, because of that, we think that there are certain rights that the family has. Question: are these core values and are these rights self-evident? Self-evident to everyone who isn't morally perverse? Or are they not really self-evident? If they're not really self-evident, then they need to be argued for. And when we argue for these core values, these core rights, what kind of an argument do we make, and what turns out to be the ground level of that argument? A whole lot of people, perhaps the majority, would say that the ground level of the argument is the prevailing tendencies of a given culture. Or a whole lot of people would say the ground level is power. We have to, I think, if we really want a dialogue, engage our interlocutors at the most fundamental levels. Does the Christian Democratic Party do this? Do you do it? Should we do it?
I think the Christian Democratic Party do it in the way that they talk about man as a person and what it means, this personhood. I think actually, if we look at if like human rights are self-evident or not in a society, it's obvious that even though we have the Declaration of Human Rights, still atrocities happen. My husband ended up in Sweden because of civil war in modern time Europe, in Bosnia, which really showed like the worst of what people can be. And this comes down to, in some way, how we talk about each other and how politicians are allowed to talk about their opponents, because they stir this pot, how we then talk about each other. And I think it's of uttermost importance that we talk good about each other as long as we can, that we recognize the good things in our opponents. I think like society or personhood, like it boils down to, are other people the means for me to get something for myself? Or do I see a person as another you? You know, with Martin Buber thinking of I and thou, this dualistic view. And this boils also down to actually what you want other people to do to them, to you, you should do to them. And I think that this is something that becomes self-evident in a healthy friendship or a healthy family. And I think that they are self-evident. And then you start working on larger groups, and you then start having the groups against each other. But you need to promote this, that it's okay to see other people as a you, not something that should do things for you to get ahead, but that you are actually persons in relation to each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Christopher, any thought about how to go and begin reflecting on the foundation of right? Is that a job of a Christian Democratic Party or a political party?
Well, I can't see that a political party is going to be very effective if towards the purposes of human society, if it doesn't have some ideas about these things and can't communicate them. And that's especially true today, where there's a good deal of confusion, even about what the human nature is. So how else are we going to do that unless we actually have the ideas and can reflect on them and articulate them?
Okay, thank you.
Can I,
yes.
if
Go ahead.
I can
Yes.
say something? Yes. But I think that Christian Democrats all around always talk about the family as something good, but we need to talk about why family is good. It's because that's the place we grow into persons. That's the place where you do look in your mother's or your father's eyes and you are seen, and you have this kind of relationship where you exist for each other and not to just be a part of something that's going to be good for me. You also, sorry, please, Maria.
No, I think, yes. Jim, you want to say something?
I think I've said enough.
Okay.
Well, all right. Since you asked, Maria, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And yet, there is a major philosophical tendency, which was also the major philosophical tendency before Socrates. It was the major philosophical tendency among the pre-Socratics. And that philosophy is one or other form of materialism. And certainly today, that's the dominant view. Now, suppose that undergirding much of contemporary political life is a kind of view that when all is said and done, the human person, and we always say person, we in the party always say person, the person is really a biological organism. And the most fundamental understanding of that biological organism brings us down to an atomic level. And we have really there the interplay at the most fundamental level of physical forces. And that's the real truth. Mm-hmm. And if that's the real truth, how in the world do you get to the values that we take to be central? You might talk about the common good. Somebody else might say, well, and then that becomes the survival advantage of the species, doesn't it? Come on, fess up. That's what the common good really is. And I think unless we can challenge people who say that publicly and confidently, will forever be uh, dismissed as sentimentalists.
Mm. But just being on the atomic level, just being flesh, so to say, is not the experience people have of themselves. And if you go back to talking about you and your relationship in your families, or if you had a bad family, your relationship with good friends, where you are seen, then I think people can relate. On a larger level, of course, you would say like, well, Italy or China or them or them or them. There's a lot of them. But if you bring it down to all the yous that are in your life, I think, and if you keep talking about this as evident that people have an inner dignity, and saying that that you believe it to be true, there is a power of words as well. I mean, let other people speak their mind then, but do not have to have facts showing that it's not true when their facts are not underbased by science as well.
This is the very last thing I'll say, except for reading the gospel. I think what we want to say to materialists is your philosophical view doesn't really have the explanatory power that it requires.
Mm-hmm.
There are all sorts of phenomena that are as real can be, and they're the warp and woof of everyday life. And you offer an explanatory system that fails. You simply can't do justice to these things. It's a reductionist approach.
Let me interject because we are getting closer to the end. And just to reinforce what Maria is saying, I think we human beings are people of encounter. And our encounter is not at the level of material reality, is an embrace where we show who we are in our freedom, our choices, our values. And that include also those who are materialists. So there is a first start or first step of affection, I think, that we need to go. And that is why I think friendship is key. There is a story, I think, a very interesting story that I heard when I was studying philosophy, and it stick with me all these years, was young 7-year-old kid who was carried out in his shoulders, his older brother, very heavy older brother, and was wounded. And he's carried out, and somebody saw him passing by the young kid with this heavy man on his shoulder. And the individual who saw said, well, what are you doing? It's too heavy for you. And the kid responded, but it's my brother. So there is something more than the weight that we carry in relation to one another. And that is a human experience. There is no account. Nobody is going to be persuaded by that. You need to experience this gift, I think, is the gift of love. Well, having said that, I want to say thank you very, very much to Maria for joining us today in this very interesting encounter. And now I give to Jim the last word.
The last word is from the Gospel of today. It's the Gospel of Matthew. At that time, Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, went up on the mountain and sat down there. Great crowds came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, the deformed, the mute, and many others. They placed them at his feet, and he cured them. The crowds were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the deformed made whole, the lame walking, and the blind able to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. Jesus summoned his disciples and said, "My heart is moved with pity for the crowd, for they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry for fear they may collapse on the way." The disciples said to him, "Where could we ever get enough bread in this deserted place to satisfy such a crowd?" Jesus said to them, "How many loaves do you have?" "7," they replied, "and a few fish." He ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, gave thanks, broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied. They picked up the fragments left over, 7 baskets full. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.